Hi everyone, you're watching the lab demos at cloudsecuritymasterclass.com. Each of our labs have a supporting article at our website. Please check those out for a well-rounded learning experience.
In this video lab, we would create a custom AWS VPC and show how connectivity from VPC resources to the public internet can be achieved. Remember that a VPC is an isolation boundary for our AWS resources in a particular AWS region and is similar in concept to the private network that we would create in our private data centers to house IT resources. For a primer on AWS VPC and its various connectivity patterns to the outside world, read our article at cloudsecuritymasterclass.com. This video is divided into 3 labs. In Lab 1, we'll create a custom VPC with 2 subnetworks. In Lab 2, we'll create a public EC2 instance, also called a virtual machine, in one subnet and try to SSH into it. This should fail by default. In the final lab, we'll create an internet gateway and try the SSH again. This should now work with the internet gateway, and that's what we're trying to show in this video, that default connectivity from the public internet is disabled in a custom VPC, and in order to enable it, you would have to use an internet gateway. So in this first part of this lab, I'm going to create a custom AWS VPC. I'm logged into my AWS account, and I'm going to go to the VPC section here, and I'm going to click on create VPC. Now, as of this time of this making this video, there are a couple of ways you can create VPCs. One is the VPC only way, where only the VPC is created, but AWS kind of simplifies the option for you to be able to create VPC plus subnetworks, route tables, and all the other connectivity that your VPC might need. But since this is a basic introduction to VPC, I would just create the VPC and show you how those custom options can be created for your own custom needs. And I'm gonna give it a name of CloudSec class VPC. Now, each VPC needs to be assigned a particular IP CIDR range or the IP address range, and this essentially provides the whole block of IP addresses that the resources created within the VPC can be assigned to in the future. If you are unfamiliar with the CIDR notation, I would advise to use tools like IP address guide, and these are available on internet, and you can search for the CIDR range here, and it would show you the IP addresses that belong to this particular range. So for the purposes of this VPC, I'm going to use the range of 10.0.0.0/20, and which is essentially around 4096 IP addresses. They start from 10.0.0.0 to 10.0.15.255. And I will just keep all the default values here as it is and click on create VPC. Now this has created a VPC for me already, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to subnets and create 2 subnetworks within this particular VPC. Gonna select my VPC which I created, CloudSec class -VPC, and give it a name of subnet 1. And as you probably might have seen in our read in our article, that VPCs are attached to a particular AWS region, whereas the subnetworks within them are attached to a particular availability zone. So I have an option here of selecting a particular availability zone. I'm going to select 1A for subnet 1. And then the IP CIDR range for the subnet is any range of IP addresses within the block of VPC IP addresses that you previously selected. So I'm going to go back to my CIDR range tool here, and I'm going to do 1.0 with 24, and this one has the first IP of 10.0.1.0 and the last IP 10.0.1.255. It's almost 256 IP addresses, and I'm going to use this as the range for my subnet. Gonna click create subnet, and this creates subnet 1 for me. I'm going to create another subnet. Let's call it subnet 2. And this time the range is going to be 10.0.20.24, which is has the first IP address of 10.0.20 and the last IP address of 10.0.255. So again, around 256 IP addresses will be assigned to this subnet. So now that my two subnets are created, you can see them here. I'm going to go back to my Your VPC menu and click on the VPC that I just created. Now AWS has this new feature called resource map, which very easily shows you which VPC is attached to which subnets and which route tables are connected for you, right? And this gives a very easy menu for you to analyze your network to see what are the resources attached to the VPC network. So in this case, our VPC has two subnetworks within it, which we just created. Both subnets are in the US East 1A availability zone, so they're not spread across multiple availability zones. It's just using one availability zone. You could have very easily, when you were creating subnet 2, assign it to 1B or 1C or another AZ, but we chose to do it in 1AZ. And then there's a route table that's already created by default, and this is interesting to see. So let's open this route table and see what kind of a route this table has. So by default, AWS has automatically created this route for the destination 10.0.0/20, which is the IP address range for the VPC, and with a target of local, which basically means that all connectivity within the VPC is allowed by default. So, so in this part of the lab, we have created a custom VPC, attached this VPC to two subnets, and we saw that a route is automatically created for connectivity within the VPC. So in this next section, we are going to create an EC2 instance and connect it to one of the two subnets that we have created. And the intention behind this section is to see if default connectivity to this EC2 instance is allowed by AWS. We're going to assign this EC2 a public IP address, and we'll try to SSH into it to see if connectivity is allowed by default. So I will go to the EC2 menu here, click on instances and launch instance. Gonna give this a name VM public so we can identify if the VM is supposed to be public or not, and use the default Amazon Linux AMI here. And for SSH into an EC2 instance, we need a key pair. So I've already created this CloudSec key pair, but if you have not done this before, you can just click on create new key pair. It will create a new one for you, and don't forget to save the private key, because you will be needing that for logging into this EC2 later. So I already have this saved in my my folder, and I'll show you how to SSH using this private key in the later part of this video. For our network settings, this by default takes the default VPC. So we'll be clicking on edit here and connecting it to the VPC that we have created. And for subnet, let's just select subnet 1. So we are creating this public VM with a public IP address in subnet 1. And for auto assign public IP, we'll click on enable, because we want public IP to be assigned to it so that we can try to access it from our desktop. So we're going to cover firewall in a later part of this tutorial, but for the purposes of this video, we want some kind of firewall allowing SSH into this EC2, because we'll be connecting it from our desktop. So I'm going to say create a new security group, launch wizard 3, or maybe we can change it to public SSH from desktop, so that we remember the name. And in the inbound rules, I'm going to say SSH TCP protocol port 2022, and instead of anywhere here, I'm going to click on custom so that it doesn't allow connectivity from anywhere in the internet. I'm just going to put a source, my IP address. So this is my IP address of my machine. For if you're doing it from your side, feel free to get that IP address of your machine and put it here. Um, this is security best practice to only allow IP addresses from the places where you want to connect to, and not from everywhere. And let's go down. I think apart from that, everything else looks good here. We can click on launch instance to create this EC2 instance. This is currently in the state of pending. It will take about a minute to be in the running state, so we'll pause the video and come back to it once it's running. Okay, so now the instance is in the running state and we can try to connect to it. And you can confirm by clicking here that this EC2 instance has a public IP address as we intended it to be. And in the security, you can also see the security group is attached to it, which allows the 22 port to be opened from this particular IP address. So in theory, we should be able to connect to this EC2 instance from this source. And in order to connect to it, you can click on connect here, and AWS will provide you the instructions on how to connect to it from the various mechanisms here. We're going to use the SSH client here. So I'm going to copy this command chmod, and we can confirm that we have the private key here. I'm going to give it permissions, and then I'm gonna run this command where essentially you're using this private key to connect to this public VM with the EC2-U user. So let's see what happens. As you can see, there is some network delay. We're not able to connect to it, right? And this will time out in a bit. So what's happening here is that even though this VM has a public IP, the security group is allow from this particular machine, we are still not able to connect to it. And that's the intention behind this video. We wanted to show you that by default, even if you create a public instance, public IP address to a VM, you would still not be able to connect to it. And the solution for this is to attach the internet gateway to the subnet. We'll see that next. Okay, so we have this public IP address assigned to an EC2 instance. We try to connect to it. By default, we are getting the operation timed out issue. Now we're going to see how we can use internet gateway to solve this issue. So I'll go back to my AWS screen. I'm going to open up VPC here. And we're going to go to the internet gateways section here. And by default, you might see this internet gateway in your AWS account. This is attached by default to the default default VPC that's created by AWS. It's not attached to any custom VPCs that you create, similar to how we created one in the previous part of this video. So I'm going to click on create internet gateway here and give it a name. Click on create internet gateway, and this is now created, but if you see the state, it shows as detached. So our next step here would be to attach this gateway to the VPC, and click on attach internet gateway, and now it shows the state as attached. So just by attaching it to the VPC, it's not going to give your EC2 instances public access. What you have to do next is that you have to create a route for this internet gateway from in your route table attached to the subnet. So I'm going to go to subnets here, and remember that we created the EC2 instance in subnet 1. So I'm going to click on subnet 1 here, go to route tables, and I'm going to see that there is only one route available here, which is to enable private connectivity within the VPC. So what I want to do here is that I want to create a new route. Now, also remember that if I go to VPCs and click on this one and see the resource map, you see that there's just one route table and it's attached to both of my subnets. So in this case, I only want to attach that route to the internet gateway only to subnet 1, not to subnet 2. And this might be a case in your networking environment as well, where you want only one subnet to gain public connectivity, to have public connectivity, um, which you may be calling those the public subnet. In our case, we have just subnet 1 and subnet 2. But if you want to do that, you would have to create a new route table. Right? So I'll go to route tables here, create a route table, call it, and select the VPC and click create route table. Within this route table, I want to create a route, and again by default it creates this local route, which we do not need because that's already there. I'm gonna click edit here, and it's something that you can't remove. It will be the local route would be there by default. But what we need is a route to the internet, and internet in this case would be represented by the 000/0 site range. And for our target, I'm going to select internet gateway and select the cloudsec IGW, which I just created. With this done, all I have to do now is go back to subnets again, and in subnet 1 in route tables, click on edit route table association and connect it to this one instead, public connect route table, right? And I will show this route that we just added to this subnet. Click on save. So what we have done in this part is that we have now made subnet 1 attached to the internet gateway, and so there is a route to the public internet from this subnet. And this is really the distinguishing factor in AWS between a public subnet and a private subnet. The factor is that, is an internet gateway attached to a subnet? If it is, and it has a route to the internet, then that will be a public subnet. The other ones, which are without the right to internet gateway, would be the private subnet. So having done that, let's go back to our terminal and check if the EC2 instance can now be connected via SSH. So I'm going to run the same command again, and there you go. Now we are able to SSH into the EC2 instance. And if you want to see if this EC2 instance has connectivity to the public internet, you can test by running commands like ping, and you can see how it's able to send the packets to google.com, so it's able to have outbound connectivity to the internet as well.
So this is it for the lab walkthrough. Keep watching out for more videos and articles at cloudsecuritymasterclass.com.